Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Wisdom of Solomon, the 10th chapter. She preserved the first formed father of the world, which is talking about, still dealing with wisdom here. So it says here, she preserved the first formed father of the world that was created alone and brought him out of his fall. And this first formed father of the world is in reference to Adam. Okay, now what he means by that was created alone, right, and brought him out of his fall is that even though, right, Adam fell, and we know he fell and he sinned, he didn't, or the sons of God didn't completely fall into wickedness, right? We still had the wisdom of the Lord. So that's how he was brought from out of his fall by wisdom. It doesn't mean that his transgression didn't count. It still did, but that transgression didn't lead us into complete wickedness. Okay. Verse 2, and gave him power to rule all things. But when the unrighteous went away from her in his anger, this is dealing with Cain, right? So verse 2, and gave him power to rule all things. That was the dominion, right, that Adam was given through wisdom. But when the unrighteous went away from her in his anger, right, that was Cain, he perished also in the fury wherewith he murdered his brother. See, so he went away from wisdom. He departed from the the wisdom that was given to guide and to govern them, and committed murder, right, in his anger. And he perished also in the fury wherewith he murdered his brother. Because eventually Cain got judged for that, right? Eventually he ended up dying, but the scriptures don't go into detail on how. But he did get, the Lord put that curse on him. For whose cause the earth being drowned with the flood, wisdom again preserved it. And why was that? Because wickedness started to abound upon the earth. Because you had now you had men starting to populate, men starting to, populate. The scriptures say daughters were born unto them. But this wasn't only because of the sons of God going off. The scriptures say the earth was filled with violence before the Lord. Well, guess what? It says for whose cause, right? Who was the context of verse 3 talking about? Cain. All right, and those that came after him. And when you read the book of Genesis, you see the mindset they had. You had was it Lamech? Singing to his wives about how he had slain a man to his wounding. So basically, being wounded, he ended up, slaying that man. So you can only imagine them carrying on that spirit that Cain had in them. But it started to spread all throughout. Long story short, it says here, the earth being drawn with the flood, wisdom again preserved it, and directed the course of the righteous in a piece of wood of small value. How did wisdom preserve it? Because Noah found grace in the sight of the Lord. How and why did Noah find grace in the sight of the Lord? Did the scriptures not mention what wisdom does? So, let's go here. It says, I think it's entering. Let's look for that. Wisdom of Solomon 7:27. And being but one, she can do all things. Speaking of wisdom, and remaining in herself, she maketh all things new, and in all ages entering into holy souls. So Noah was a holy soul, and wisdom entered into him. She maketh them friends of God and prophets. So guess what? Abraham also was a holy soul in which wisdom entered into. So because wisdom entered into the holy soul of Noah, he was able to find grace in the sight of the Lord. And that was the preservation of the world. Because if not, the Lord would have destroyed everybody. Verse 4, back in Wisdom of Solomon 10:4, and directed the course of the righteous, which is dealing with Noah, in a piece of wood of small value. That's the ark. Moreover, the nations in their wicked conspiracy, being confounded, dealing with the Tower of Babel, She found out the righteous, because that's where the Lord confused the languages over there. She found out the righteous and preserved him blameless unto God, and kept him strong against his tender compassion toward his son, which is dealing with Abraham. Okay, so through wisdom, which you'll start to see the correlation between wisdom and the spirit of the Lord, which is like interchangeable, because the scriptures tell you that she is the breath of God. So she preserved Abraham blameless unto God through his actions and his faith that he had in the Lord, and kept him strong against his tender compassion toward his son. What is that in reference to when the Lord asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac? The reason Abraham was able to do it was because of that spirit that was on him. And that kept him strong to obey the Lord, even against how much love and tender compassion he had toward his son Isaac. When the ungodly perished, she delivered the righteous man who fled from the fire which fell down upon 5 cities. And this is dealing with Lot, right? Because that's what happened with Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim. And I forgot the other name of the city that was there. So you start to see here that it is, it's more along the spirit of the Lord, which is he's still speaking of here as wisdom. Verse 7. Of those wickedness even to this day, the waste land that smoketh is a testimony, dealing with that region of those cities, right? Sodom and Gomorrah and the rest of those cities that got destroyed. And plants bearing fruit that never come to ripeness. So basically the Solomon is saying here, like that it's still a witness that you can have plants over there, but they bear fruit that don't really, they're not fruitful. They're not, usable. And a standing pillar of salt is a monument of an unbelieving soul. And that's dealing with Lot's wife, because that whenever anybody would see that, they would know, hey, what is this? Oh, that's Lot's wife who didn't believe, and she disobeyed what was instructed to her by the angels. For regarding not wisdom, they gat not only this hurt, that they knew not the things which were good, but also left behind them to the world a memorial of their foolishness. So because they didn't regard wisdom, and they were going in the ways of, homosexuality, bestiality, all forms of fornication and wickedness going on over there. They got not only this hurt. So not only did they bring upon themselves this destruction, that they knew not the things which were good, because they were doing evil, but also left behind them to the world a memorial of their foolishness. So Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction was an example, a memorial left to the world to show the folly in the inhabitants of that place and the consequence of that. So that in the things wherein they offended, they could not so much as be hid. We now today know about Sodom and Gomorrah because of the things that they did and the judgment that came upon them. So they couldn't hide that. That city couldn't be hid in terms of the wickedness they did, because the judgment basically was like writing out their wickedness in permanent ink. So anytime people reference Sodom and Gomorrah, it's like, yeah, that's Sodom and Gomorrah. They did this, they did that, they did this. So they can't even hide that history about them. But wisdom delivered from pain those that attended upon her, right? As we just went through some examples leading up to this verse. When the righteous fled from his brother's wrath, she guided him in right paths, dealing with Jacob. Shewed him the kingdom of God, and gave him knowledge of holy things, made him rich in his travels, and multiplied the fruit of his labors. Right? That's why when he went and fled from his brother Esau, he was able to come back rich from working for Laban. But why? Because wisdom was with him, and he was able to still, even though Laban was trying to cheat him and change his wages, Jacob was still able to come out triumphant. Now, when it mentions that she showed him the kingdom of God, that's referring to Jacob's dream, right, at Bethel, where he saw, the ladder reaching to heaven and the angels ascending and descending on it. And basically God reaffirmed the covenant promises to him over there, right? So that's what that means. And let me see, what precept was that? Jacob's dream. Verse. It's in Genesis, but just to get it real quick, right? Genesis 28 and 10 to 22. So there's a reference. You can go and read it if you would so like. Verse 11, in the covetousness of such as oppressed him, she stood by him and made him rich. This is dealing with Laban, right? And how he oppressed Jacob, right? And he was deceitful to Jacob, but wisdom stood by Jacob and still made him rich. She defended him from his enemies and kept him safe from those that lay in wait. So those that had hurt, right, for Jacob, starting with Esau and even Laban, because remember, Laban eventually got mad because Jacob fled and didn't tell him, and he was going to do him hurt, but the Lord intervened. And in a dream, he warned Laban. He said, you better not touch him. Don't speak good or evil concerning him. Leave him. And in a sore conflict, she gave him the victory, right? Which also goes into not only his encounter with Laban, but also remember that Jacob ended up wrestling that angel. That's how he got the name Israel. That he might know what that goodness is stronger than all. So that confirmed for him that having the goodness or being righteous in the eyes of the Lord is stronger than all, because through all his journeys, when he came back to Bethel, remember he said to the Lord, he said, well, if you truly are the God of Abraham and Isaac, right, my fathers, take me safely and bring me back, and I'm gonna basically worship you. And when he came back, I believe he built an altar at Bethel and worshiped the Lord there. When the righteous was sold, she forsook him not. This is dealing with Joseph. She forsook him not, but delivered him from sin. Because what happened after Joseph was sold? He was bought in Egypt by Potiphar, and he became a servant in Potiphar's household. And when Potiphar's wife wanted to engage in adultery with him, he refused, right? So he was delivered from sin. But what happened? He was thrown in prison. That's the pit, right? She went down with him into the pit. So even though he was thrown in prison, wisdom had not forsaken him and left him not in bonds. So the Lord, through the wisdom given to Joseph, what was the example that was used here? He was able to interpret the dreams of the butler and the baker. And eventually that led to his release from prison. And left him not in bonds till she brought him the scepter of the kingdom. And Joseph became ruler in Egypt, right? He became second to Pharaoh, even though in authority he was like Pharaoh, because Pharaoh committed everything to his hands. And power against those that oppressed him, right? Going into the same Egyptians, he had now power over them as a governor. As for them that had accused him, she shewed them to be liars. Yeah, because he was accused of adultery or trying to force himself on Potiphar's wife, but clearly him being raised up into this high position dispelled all of that and gave him perpetual glory. She delivered the righteous people and blameless seed from the nation that oppressed them. She entered into the soul of the servant, and that's dealing with the deliverance of the nation of Israel from the Egyptians. They were Israel were the blameless seed, and the nation that oppressed them were the Egyptians. She entered into the soul of the servant of the Lord, which is dealing with Moses, and withstood dreadful kings in wonders and sights, or in signs. And that's talking about Moses against Pharaoh, right, with the miracles the Lord had him perform with Aaron. Rendered to the righteous a reward of their labors, guided them in a marvelous way, and was unto them for a cover by day and a light of stars in the night season. And this is referring to when the Lord led Israel through the wilderness via the chariot, right, and where it was a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Brought them through the Red Sea and led them through much water. That's when Moses parted the Red Sea and they were able to walk on dry land. but she drowned their enemies and cast them up out of the bottom of the deep. So when Israel finished crossing, what happened? The water closed down on them, down on the Egyptians, and drowned them, and eventually their bodies floated to the top. And you see, it says she, right? But it's referring really now to the Spirit of the Lord, because we know it's the Lord's doing anyway. Therefore the righteous spoiled the ungodly, and praised thy holy name, O Lord, and magnified with one accord thine hand that fought for them. Right? And that was spoiling the Egyptians and getting the victory over them and praising the Lord. For wisdom opened the mouth of the dumb and made the tongues of them that cannot speak eloquent. Let's remember, what is it that Moses said, right? That he was, when the Lord sent him to go and speak, his complaint or his excuse that he tried to make was, oh, he's not good with words, you know. And then eventually the Lord said, your brother Aaron can speak to Pharaoh for you. But eventually Moses ended up being a speaker anyway, right, to Israel. Even though, you know, at times he would have Aaron, right, speak to the elders and so on. There were also times when he would speak directly to them. And that brings us to the end of the book of Wisdom of Solomon, the 10th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.